You are kneeling by a lakeshore in Kenya, 10,000 years ago. The water is flat and calm, reeds hiss in the warm wind. Your family is close, and there is fresh fish drying on the rocks. Life, honestly, is pretty good right now. Then you hear them coming through the tall grass. A dozen strangers moving fast, and they are not here to trade. One carries a wooden club, another holds a bow, already drawn. You never learned their language, and now you never will. This is not a scene from a movie, and nobody wrote it down. It is a real place called Nataruk, and archaeologists found 27 people buried in the mud there. At least 10 of them died exactly like this, clubbed, stabbed, and shot on the edge of a beautiful lake 10,000 years ago. And they have been waiting all this time to tell you something you probably do not expect. So let me ask you something that sounds simple. When did humans first go to war? Not a fight. Not two hungry brothers swinging rocks over a piece of meat. War one group of people deciding, together, on purpose, to go and kill another group. It feels like it should have a tidy answer. Surely war arrived with kings, with borders, with cities and gold and armies in matching uniforms. Surely it is a side effect of civilization. The price we pay for crowns and taxes and having too many neighbors. That is the comfortable version. But here is the problem. Every single time archaeologists push their shovels into the dirt, the answer gets older and stranger. Because the oldest evidence of organized human violence does not come from an empire. It comes from people with no farms, no writing, no metal, and no word for nation. Some of it is older than farming itself. So the real question is not just when. It is why on Earth it started so unbelievably early. Think about how strange that is. We tend to imagine our distant ancestors as gentle, wide-eyed foragers drifting through an empty Eden, too busy surviving to bother hating anyone. That picture is comforting. It is also, as far as the bones can tell us, mostly wishful thinking. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you. The answer is not one date. It is a stack of them, each one shoving the beginning further back into the dark. We are going to walk through the actual evidence, the real sites, the real skeletons. The stone points still stuck in the bone. We will meet our closest living relatives doing something deeply, uncomfortably familiar. And right at the end, I have saved one fact that quietly flips the entire story on its head. Let's go. Let's start by stepping straight into a trap so you don't have to. If you wanted to find the first war, you might go hunting for the first weapon. That is a mistake, and it is a big one, because weapons are much, much older than war. In an old coal mine near Schoningen in Germany, archaeologists pulled a set of wooden spears out of the ground. And these are not crude sticks. They are beautifully made balanced like a modern Olympic javelin, carved and sharpened from spruce with real skill. They are roughly 300,000 years old. Let that number just sit there for a moment. 300,000 years. That is long. Long before our species looked the way it does today. But here is the catch that saves us. Those spears were built to hunt horses, not people. And that difference is the whole game. A sharp stick is just a tool. It only becomes a weapon of war when someone decides to point it at their neighbor. On purpose with friends, so we cannot simply count pointy objects and call it war. Or every kitchen on Earth is a war crime. What we actually need is bodies. We need humans killed by other humans, deliberately, in a group. That is the bar we have to clear. And clearing it is far trickier than it sounds, because a skeleton does not come with a signed confession or a motive attached. It gets even messier. In 2025, a new study argued those same Schoningen spears might actually be younger than we thought, closer to 200,000 years old and possibly made by Neanderthals, which just proves the point. Even our best, most famous ancient weapons are surrounded by fog. A weapon tells you that someone could kill. It never tells you who they meant to kill, or why. For that, you have to find the victims themselves. So before we start digging up our own ancestors, let's look sideways for a second. Let's go meet your cousins in 1974 in Gombe in Tanzania. The primatologist Jane Goodall watched something that no scientist had ever recorded before. A single chimpanzee community she had studied for years had slowly split into two rival groups. One in the north, one in the south, And then the northern group, the Kasakela, started to hunt the southern one down. Not for food, for territory. Over the next 4 years, they methodically picked off the breakaway males one at a time. They would travel quietly in tight coordinated patrols, corner a lone rival deep in the trees. And beat him to death by 1978, all 6 adult males of the southern group were dead. The whole community was simply gone. Goodall called it a war, and reportedly it wrecked her a little. Because chimps are not some distant lizard on a far branch of life. We share a common ancestor with them somewhere around 7 million years back. And that means coordinated, lethal, us against them raiding might not be a clever human invention at all. It might be a very old family heirloom passed down from before we were even human. The kind of heirloom nobody actually wants in the will. And it is not a one-off fluke either. Since Gombe primatologists have documented these lethal, coordinated raids in chimp groups all across Africa. The pattern is remarkably consistent, a patrol of. Males quietly slips to the edge of their territory, finds an outnumbered neighbor, and kills him where the odds are safe. That is not a fit of rage, that is a strategy. And it is the same brutal logic hit them when they are weak. That echoes through human warfare for the next several million years. All right, now let's come home back to our own line, and to the oldest war cemetery ever found on Earth. In the 1960s, before a giant new dam drowned that stretch of the Nile Valley forever, archaeologists were racing to excavate a site in what is now Sudan called Jebel Sahaba. And what they found was a graveyard 61. Skeletons, laid out and deliberately buried, roughly 13,400 years old. These people had not died gently in their sleep. Stone projectile points were found lodged inside their bones, jammed into spines, into skulls, into hips. 21 individuals had weapons literally stuck inside their bodies. For decades, everyone assumed it was the aftermath of one terrible battle, a single awful day. But in 2021, a team led by the researcher Isabelle Crèvecoeur re-examined every bone under modern microscopes and published it in the journal Scientific Reports. What they found was somehow worse. About 2/3 of these people showed both healed and unhealed wounds. Healed, that word does a lot of heavy lifting. It means they were attacked, they survived, they recovered, and then they were attacked all over again. This was not one bad day. This was a feud that ground on for years, raid after raid after raid. Think of it as the oldest recorded blood feud on the planet, 13,000 years deep. And here's the part I really need you to hold on to. Nobody here farmed anything. These were hunter-gatherers living on the river, killing each other in a slow-motion war long before the first seed was ever planted. In the first field. And there may be a reason why. Around that time, the climate was shifting hard, and the Nile Valley was becoming a narrow, crowded strip of survivable land. Researchers think rival groups got squeezed together along the river, competing for the same fish and the same shrinking territory. So Jebel Sahaba is not just a crime scene. It is a warning pack. Enough desperate people into a small enough space, hand them stone-tipped arrows. And 13,000 years ago, the result looked painfully familiar. Okay, now let's jump forward and watch what happens when people finally stop wandering and settle down. Around 7,000 years ago, in a place called Talheim in Germany, someone dug a pit and threw 34 human bodies into it. 16 of them were children, 9 were men, 7 were women. Their skulls had been caved in with stone adzes, and here is the chilling detail. Those adzes were the exact same axe-like tools these early farmers used every day to build their houses and clear their land. The murder weapon was the farm equipment, and there were almost no defensive wounds on any of them, which tells you something dark and specific. They were not fighting back. They were running, or they were already caught. Archaeologists also noticed the group was strangely short on young women, which suggests the attackers were not only there to kill, they came to take some people alive. This is war with a purpose now, war with a shopping list, land grain, and human beings as property. And Talheim is not some freak exception. Around that same stretch of time, high up in the Alps, a man we now call Otzi froze solid into a glacier about 5003. 100 years ago, for years everyone assumed the poor guy just got lost and died in a storm. Then a scan revealed an arrowhead buried deep in his left shoulder. He had been shot from behind and he had quietly bled to death. And that's not a metaphor, that's a real stone arrowhead in a real human shoulder in a genuine 5,000-year-old cold case. The lesson lands hard. The moment humans owned things worth stealing, other humans showed up to steal them. And notice how the story changes once people settle. A wandering band with nothing but the tools on their backs is a hard, low-value target. But a village with stored grain, with fields, with animals, and packed storerooms is a prize that just sits there season after season, unable to run away. Farming did not invent violence, Jebel Sahaba already proved that. But farming did give violence something enormous to fight over, and a fixed address to attack. You cannot raid a harvest that does not exist yet. Now let's see just how big and how organized this thing can get. Fast forward again all the way to around the year 1325. On the banks of the Missouri River in what is now South Dakota, a village at a place called Crow Creek had built itself real defenses. A deep ditch, a wooden palisade, actual fortifications. These people clearly knew something bad was coming for them. It did not matter one bit archaeologists uncovered. The remains of at least 486 people, dumped together in that very fortification ditch that was very nearly the entire town. Around 90% of them showed cut marks from scalping, along with savage mutilation of the bones. And here's the detail that genuinely haunts me. The skeletons show clear signs of malnutrition, and the defensive ditch itself was only half dug. So picture it. These were hungry people living through a harsh and unstable climate. Squeezed into a fight over shrinking farmland who saw the attack coming, grabbed their shovels, and simply ran out of time. Crow Creek is not the beginning of war. It is what war looks like after it has had thousands of years to practice. And get good at it. An entire community wiped off the map in a single afternoon, and buried in the exact ditch they had been digging to save themselves. And there is one more quiet clue in those bones. Among the dead, archaeologists found very few young women, far fewer than you would expect. It is the same haunting pattern we saw back at Talheim. The attackers were not only there to kill, they came to carry people off. So this was not mindless slaughter. It was a raid with an objective driven by hunger and a warming. Drying land that could no longer feed everyone. The same three ingredients keep showing up across every site and every era: crowding, scarcity, and something worth taking. So by now you have probably started forming an opinion about all this. And if you have just walked straight into an argument that has been raging for over 200 years. On one side stands Thomas Hobbes, who declared that human life without government was a war of all against all, nasty brutish. And short war, to Hobbes, is simply our factory default setting. On the other side stands Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the seductive dream of the noble savage, the idea that early humans lived in gentle, generous harmony. And that war was a nasty disease we only caught later from property, from cities, from farming. And for a long time, honestly, Rousseau was winning in the popular imagination. Peaceful cavemen just feel nicer then. In 1996, an archaeologist named Lawrence Keeley wrote a book with a wonderfully blunt title, War Before Civilization. And the subtitle was even blunter, The Myth of the Peaceful Savage. Keeley argued that scholars had been quietly scrubbing the violence out of prehistory for years, simply because it made them uncomfortable to look at. And every site we have just walked through together, the graves, the arrowheads, the caved-in skulls, is exactly the reason that scrubbing finally became impossible. More recently, the psychologist Steven Pinker took Hobbes even further, arguing that ancient life was staggeringly violent, and that the modern world, for all its horrors, is actually the most peaceful era humans have ever lived in. Plenty of other scholars think Pinker overstates his case wildly, that he cherry-picks the bloodiest sites and ignores the quiet ones. And that fight is still going loudly in journals right now. But notice what has already happened. Both sides have quietly stopped arguing about whether ancient war existed. The graves settled that now they only argue about how much of it there was. Now let's be honest with each other for a minute. This is the part where I have to slow us both down, because the evidence is a lot thinner than a good story would like it to be. Bones are rare. The overwhelming majority of people who ever lived left absolutely nothing behind. And here is the frustrating truth. Most violence leaves no mark on a skeleton at all. A spear driven through soft flesh, a strangling a raid where everyone got away. None of that fossilizes. So we are genuinely trying to reconstruct the entire human past from a tiny handful of unlucky, well-preserved graves. And that blade cuts both ways. Some writers grab every cracked skull they can find and triumphantly declare that humans are simply born killers, natural born warriors, red in tooth and claw. That is overreaching, badly. Plenty of ancient sites show no violence whatsoever. And some hunter-gatherer groups recorded in modern times were strikingly beautifully peaceful. A single massacre does not prove endless war, any more than one quiet green valley proves eternal peace. The honest answer, the boring and true one, is that early humans were fully capable of both, of deep tenderness and of slaughter, and which one showed up depended enormously on where they happened to be standing. There is one last thing I saved for the very end, and it is the fact that quietly rearranges every piece we have laid out. Go back with me to that lakeshore in Kenya. Back to Nataruk, the massacre we opened this whole thing with, about 10,000 years old. The lead researcher Marta Mirazon-Lar published the site in the journal Nature in 2016, and 27 people were found preserved there. At least 10 of them died violently. One was a woman, heavily pregnant, and her hands appeared to have been bound behind her. And, crucially, there were no farms here, no city, no state, no king, no metal, no walls. These were mobile hunter-gatherers, the exact people Rousseau pictured living in perfect peace. But here is the part that shatters the tidy little story. We always assume war is born from scarcity, from starving people clawing over the very last scraps of food. Nataruk was the complete opposite it sat on. A lush, fertile lakeshore absolutely rich with fish and game. With surplus food already stored in pottery, it was not a desert of desperation. It was prime real estate. And that single fact flips the motive completely. War may not have arrived because life got desperate. It may have arrived because life got good, and good things are always worth taking. As one of the researchers reflected, aggression and love are equally a part of our biology. So read this next line twice. The oldest war we can find was not fought by the starving. It was fought over a place worth killing for. Think about that for a second. We may have started fighting not when we had nothing at all, but the very moment we finally had something worth losing. It is a bleak little irony if you sit with it. The better life got, the more there was to defend. And the more reason someone else had to come and take it. Prosperity did not buy peace. It raised the stakes. So let's pull the camera all the way back now past the sites, past the centuries, until it is just you standing here right now. You come from an unbroken line of survivors. From people who ran through the grass, who buried their dead with stone points still lodged in the bone, who dug walls that were never finished in time. Every last one of your ancestors lived through some version of this, and went on to have a child anyway. War is old. It is older than the wheel, older than the plow, quite possibly older than our species itself. But so is the family drying fish beside a calm lake. And so are the careful hands that buried those broken bodies with tenderness. We inherited both of them at once, the spear and the burial, the capacity to rate a stranger and the tenderness to grieve our own. Neither one is the whole story of what we are. They have simply been traveling together in the same restless species for a very, very long time. So the next time someone tells you that war is just human nature, you can tell them the truth. It is half of it. And you, every single ordinary day, get to choose which half of that inheritance you feed.